The day I walked into that lawyer's office and signed the papers to sell my family's house, I knew I was about to destroy everything they thought they knew about me. But what they didn't know was that for the past 15 years, I had been carrying a secret that would change everything. My name is Mia, I'm 27 years old, and this is the story of how one word, burden, led me to make the most devastating decision of my life. Let me take you back to where this all began. I'm Mia, and I've always been what you'd call the family peacekeeper. You know, that person in every family who smooths over arguments, who remembers everyone's birthdays, who shows up with casseroles when someone's sick. That was me. I grew up in a small town in Ohio with my parents, Linda and Frank, and my older brother Jake. We lived in this beautiful Victorian house on Maple Street, you know the type, with the wraparound porch and the big oak tree in the front yard. It was the kind of house that screams, American dream, and my parents were so proud of it. But here's the thing about perfect-looking families, sometimes the cracks don't show until it's too late. My dad Frank was a mechanic, worked with his hands his whole life. Proud man, never asked for help, believed in pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. My mom Linda was a teacher at the local elementary school, the kind of woman who had fresh cookies ready when we got home from school. Jake, my brother, was the golden child. Star athlete in high school, got a football scholarship to Ohio State, graduated with a business degree. He was everything my parents wanted in a son, confident, successful, traditional. And then there was me. The daughter who was too sensitive, who asked too many questions, who cried too easily. The one who wanted to study art instead of something practical. The one who, at 27, was still figuring out her life while Jake was already married with 2 kids and a corner office. Growing up, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells around my dad. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't abusive or anything like that. But Frank had this way of making you feel small with just a look. He had expectations, and I rarely met them. When I was 16, I remember bringing home a painting I'd done in art class. I was so proud of it. It was this landscape of our neighborhood, and I'd spent weeks on it. I rushed into the kitchen where Dad was reading the paper. "Dad, look what I made," I said, practically bouncing with excitement. He glanced up, looked at the painting for maybe 3 seconds, and said, "That's nice, honey. But you know art doesn't pay the bills, right? Maybe you should focus more on your math homework." I felt my heart sink. Mom tried to smooth it over later, hanging the painting on the refrigerator, but the damage was done. This became the pattern, me trying to share something I cared about, Dad dismissing it as impractical or silly. College was a constant battle. I wanted to study fine arts, but Dad insisted on business or education. "At least teaching is stable," he'd say. "You can always fall back on it." Fall back on it. Like my dreams were something to recover from. We compromised on art education, which felt like a betrayal of everything I really wanted. But I told myself it was practical, that I could still create while teaching others to create. After college, I moved back home temporarily, just until I found a teaching job, I promised myself. But the job market was tough, and temporary became 6 months, then a year, then 2 years. The longer I stayed, the more I could feel my dad's disappointment growing. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he'd introduce me to his friends. "This is my daughter Mia. She's still figuring things out." Still figuring things out. At 25, then 26, then 27. While Jake was climbing the corporate ladder, I was substitute teaching and living in my childhood bedroom. The comments started getting sharper. "Maybe if you'd studied something useful instead of finger painting," he'd mutter when bills came up. Jake never had to move back home, he'd say when I'd ask to borrow the car. Mom would defend me, but quietly, privately. She'd slip me $20 for gas and whisper, "He doesn't mean it, honey. He's just worried about your future." But worry felt a lot like disappointment. And disappointment felt a lot like shame. Things really started to deteriorate after Jake's promotion last spring. He got this big job in Chicago, bought a house in the suburbs, and suddenly family dinners became Jake appreciation sessions. Jake's team increased profits by 30% this quarter, Dad would announce, beaming with pride. Jake's thinking about getting a boat, Mom would add, like this was the most impressive thing in the world. And I'd sit there, trying to contribute to the conversation, but what was I going to say? I successfully taught third graders how to draw stick figures today. The worst part was Jake himself. He wasn't trying to make me feel bad, he was just living his life. But every achievement of his felt like a spotlight on my failures. One Sunday in June, we were all having dinner, and Jake was talking about his new house. "You guys have to come visit," he said. "We have a guest room now, and Sarah's been redecorating. The kitchen is incredible, granite countertops, professional-grade appliances." "That sounds wonderful," Mom said. "Doesn't it, Mia?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "It sounds great, Jake. I'm really happy for you." Dad looked at me with this expression I'd seen so many times before, like he was seeing something that disappointed him deeply. "You know, Mia," he said, cutting into his pod roast, "maybe you should ask Jake for advice. He might know someone who's hiring. Someone who values real skills." "Dad," Mom said quietly, "Mia has skills." "Art isn't a skill that pays bills," Dad interrupted. "Jake learned that early. He studied something practical, worked hard, and now look at him. He's building a life." I felt my cheeks burn. "I am building a life, Dad. It just looks different than Jake's." "Different?" Dad put down his fork. "Mia, you're 27 years old. You're living in our house, driving our car, eating our food. Jake was independent by 23. He had a plan. I have a plan." "No, you have excuses," he said, his voice getting harder. "You have a degree you're not using and dreams that don't pay rent." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake looked uncomfortable, Mom looked like she wanted to disappear, and I felt like I'd been slapped. "I'm trying," I said quietly. "I'm really trying." "Trying isn't enough," Dad said. "At some point, you have to succeed. At some point, you have to stop being a burden on this family." Burden. That word hung in the air like smoke. I felt it settle into my chest, heavy and suffocating. Jake cleared his throat. "Dad, come on. That's not fair. Isn't it?" Dad looked at him, then back at me. "When does it end, Mia? When do you take responsibility for your own life?" I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "I'm not hungry anymore," I said, my voice shaking. "Excuse me." I made it to my room before the tears started. I could hear Mom following me, her footsteps soft on the stairs. "Honey," she said through the door, "he didn't mean it. He's just frustrated." But he did mean it. I could hear it in his voice, see it in his eyes. To him, I wasn't his daughter who was struggling, I was a burden who was failing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the dinner conversation, the word burden echoing in my head like a broken record. Around 2 a.m., I decided to make some tea and maybe work on a painting, something to quiet my mind. I crept downstairs to the kitchen, being careful not to wake anyone. But as I passed Dad's home office, I saw a light on. The door was cracked, and I could hear him talking quietly on the phone. "I know it's hard to understand, but she's not like Jake," he was saying. "She's always been different. More sensitive. Linda keeps saying she'll find her way, but I don't know, Tom. She's been living here for 2 years. 2 years. And nothing's changed." I froze. Tom was my dad's brother, Uncle Tom, who lived in Florida. I love her, Dad continued, but I can't support her forever. Jake's talking about starting a college fund for his kids, and here I am, still paying for Mia's car insurance. I should have walked away. I should have gone back to my room and pretended I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't move. Linda thinks I'm being too hard on her, Dad said. Maybe I am. But someone has to be realistic. Someone has to prepare her for the real world. There was a pause, and I could hear Uncle Tom's voice faintly through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. I don't know what else to do, Dad said. I've tried encouraging her, I've tried being patient, I've tried being tough. Nothing works. She's just stuck. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he'd hear it. I started to back away when I heard something that made my blood freeze. You know what the worst part is? Dad said. Sometimes I wonder if we made a mistake. If we should have pushed harder when she was younger. If we should have forced her to be more like Jake. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I managed to make it back to my room, but I couldn't stop shaking. My own father thought I was a mistake. A burden. A failure. I lay in bed for the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, that conversation playing over and over in my head. By morning, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what I was worth to this family. The next day, while everyone was at work, I did something I'd never done before. I went into Dad's office and looked through his financial papers. I wasn't snooping for fun, I was looking for something specific. Something I remembered from years ago, when Grandma Rose had passed away. And there it was, in a folder marked Estate Documents. When my grandmother died 5 years ago, she left the house to all of us, but not equally. The deed showed that 60% of the house belonged to me. Mom and Dad had 30%, and Jake had 10%. I stared at the document, reading it over and over again. I remembered Grandma Rose talking to me about it before she died. This house has been in our family for 3 generations, she'd said. But you, my dear, you're the one who sees its soul. You're the one who draws its corners and knows its stories. You're the one who should have it. At the time, I was 22 and didn't really understand what she meant. My parents had explained it simply, the house would stay in the family, and since I was the one who seemed most attached to it, Grandma Rose wanted me to have the bigger share. But now, looking at this document, I understood something else. This house that my parents acted like they owned, that they treated as their right to complain about me living in, I was the majority owner. I was living in my own house, and they were calling me a burden. I didn't tell anyone what I discovered. Instead, I spent the next few weeks quietly researching. I found out what the house was worth, what my options were, what the legal process would look like. The house was worth about $340,000. My 60% share was worth over $200,000. For the first time in years, I felt like I had power. I had options. I had worth. But I also had a choice to make. I could use this information to have a conversation with my family, to establish boundaries, to demand respect. The or scared me, but it also excited me. I could sell my share of the house. I could take my money and start over somewhere else. I could stop being a burden and start being independent. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Why was I fighting so hard to stay somewhere I wasn't wanted? Why was I trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I was worthless? I started making plans. I researched cities with good art scenes, looked at apartments, calculated how long $200,000 would last if I was careful. For the first time in years, I felt hope. But the final push came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks after I'd found the deed, Jake came to visit for the weekend. He was in town for a business conference, and Mom had invited him for Sunday dinner. The dinner started normally enough. Jake talked about work, Mom updated us on her students, Dad complained about a difficult customer at the shop. Then Jake said something that changed everything. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you guys about something," he said, looking at Mom and Dad. "Sarah and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to consider what happens with the house." I looked up from my plate. "What do you mean?" Jake glanced at Dad, then back at me. "Well, Mia, you're not going to live here forever, right? And Mom and Dad are getting older. This house is too big for them, too much maintenance." "Jake," Mom said quietly, "we love this house." "I know you do," Jake said. "But practically speaking, it might make sense to sell it and downsize. You could move into a nice condo, maybe closer to town. And the equity could help with retirement." I felt my heart start racing. "And where exactly do you think I'm going to live during this transition?" Jake looked uncomfortable. "Well, I mean, you'd figure something out. Maybe it's time to, branch out. Get your own place." "With what money?" I asked. "With a job," Dad said. "A real job. This might be the push you need to stop depending on us." I stared at him. "Stop depending on you?" "Mia," Mom said gently, "we're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help you become independent. By selling the house I live in. By giving you motivation to build your own life," Dad said. "Jake's right. This house is too much for us, and you can't stay here forever." I looked around the table at my family. My parents, who were planning to sell our family home and leave me homeless. My brother, who was orchestrating it all in the name of practical thinking. None of them knew what I knew. None of them realized they were planning to sell a house that mostly belonged to me. What if I said no? I asked quietly. "What?" Jake looked confused. "What if I said I don't want you to sell the house?" Dad sighed. "Mia, this isn't your decision to make. It's our house." "Is it?" Something in my voice must have sounded different, because they all stopped eating and looked at me. "Of course it is," Dad said. "We've lived here for 30 years. We've paid the mortgage, maintained it, invested in it. But what if it's not legally yours to sell?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the confusion on their faces, the dawning realization that I might know something they didn't. "Mia," Mom said slowly, "what are you talking about?" I took a deep breath. "I'm talking about Grandma Rose's will. I'm talking about the deed to this house. I'm talking about the fact that I own 60% of it." Dad's face went white. You looked at the estate documents?" I did. "And I found out something very interesting. This house that you've been treating as your right to complain about me living in. I'm the majority owner." Jake looked stunned. "That can't be right." "It is right. Grandma Rose left me 60%, you two 30%, and Jake 10%. It's all documented, all legal, all official." The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm going to sell my share of the house. I'm going to take my $200,000 and leave. And you can figure out what to do with your 40%. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Mia, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," I said. "You want me to be independent? Congratulations. You want me to stop being a burden? Done. You want me to have a plan? Here it is." Dad found his voice. "Mia, this is our family home. You can't just..." "I can't just what?" I interrupted. "I can't just make decisions about my own property. I can't just stop accepting your charity. I can't just stop being a disappointment? That's not what we meant, Mom said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. No, it's exactly what you meant. For years, you've made me feel like I'm a burden on this family. Like I'm the failure, the mistake, the one who can't get her life together. Well, guess what? I'm getting my life together. I'm just doing it without you. The next few days were a blur of tense conversations, tears, and accusations. Mom begged me to reconsider, Dad alternated between anger and attempts at apology, and Jake tried to play mediator while clearly being upset about losing his inheritance. But I'd made my decision. I contacted a lawyer, started the process of selling my share of the house, and began planning my new life. The hardest part was listening to them try to convince me I was making a mistake. Mia, please, Mom said one evening, knocking on my bedroom door. Can we talk? I let her in, and she sat on the edge of my bed like she used to when I was a child. I know your father can be harsh, she said. I know he doesn't always express himself well. But he loves you. We both do. Do you? I asked. Because it doesn't feel like love when he calls me a burden. It doesn't feel like love when you both act like I'm a failure for not being Jake. Mom was quiet for a long moment. We've made mistakes, she said finally. We've put too much pressure on you to be someone you're not. But selling the house. Mia, this is your home. No, I said. This is a place where I've been made to feel unwelcome. This is a place where I've been made to feel like I'm not good enough. A home is supposed to be where you feel safe and loved and accepted. This hasn't been that for me in a very long time. We can change, Mom said. We can do better. Maybe you can, I said. But I can't stay here waiting to find out. I can't keep living in a place where I feel like I'm apologizing for existing. Dad tried a different approach. A few days later, he cornered me in the kitchen. Mia, I know I've been hard on you, he said. Maybe too hard. But I was trying to help you. I was trying to prepare you for the real world. By calling me a burden. He winced. I shouldn't have said that. I was frustrated, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. No, it wasn't, I said. But it was honest. It was how you really feel. It's not how I feel, he said. You're my daughter. I want you to succeed. I want you to be happy. Then let me go, I said. Let me sell the house and start over. Let me prove to myself that I can make it on my own. But what if you can't, he asked. What if you run out of money? What if you can't find work? What if you need help? I looked at him for a long moment. Then I'll figure it out. Just like Jake did. Just like you did. Just like everyone else in the world does. But you don't have to do it alone, he said. You have family. Do I? I asked. Because family is supposed to support each other. Family is supposed to believe in each other. Family is supposed to make you feel like you belong. When's the last time you made me feel like I belonged here? He didn't have an answer for that. Jake's reaction was the most surprising. He called me a few days before the sale was finalized. Mia, I need to apologize, he said. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. I didn't realize how much pressure Mom and Dad were putting on you. It's not your fault, I said. You were just living your life. But I was part of it, he said. I was part of the problem. I let them compare you to me, and I didn't speak up when they should have. I let them make you feel like you weren't good enough. I felt tears pricking my eyes. Thanks for saying that. I don't want you to leave, he said. But I understand why you feel like you have to. And I want you to know that whatever happens, you're my sister. Your family. That doesn't change. That conversation meant more to me than he probably realized. The sale went through on a Tuesday in October. I signed the papers, received the check, and felt a mix of relief and terror that I'd never experienced before. $204,000. That's what my share of the house was worth after legal fees and taxes. I'd already found an apartment in Portland, Oregon. I'd always loved the Pacific Northwest, and Portland had a thriving art scene. I'd done my research, found a small studio apartment in a creative neighborhood, and even connected with a few local art collectives. The night before I left, I sat in my childhood bedroom, packing the last of my belongings. Mom knocked on the door. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded, and she sat on the bed beside me. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. I looked at her in surprise. "What?" "I'm proud of you," she repeated. "You're taking a leap of faith, following your dreams, being brave. I should have told you that sooner." "Mom. I know we failed you," she said. "I know we made you feel like you had to choose between being yourself and being loved. That's not what parents are supposed to do." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us crying. "I'm going to miss you," she said. "I'm going to miss you too," I said. "But I need to do this. I need to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone else's version of me." "I know," she said. "And I hope you find what you're looking for." Dad's goodbye was more awkward. He stood in the driveway as I loaded my car, looking like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Finally, as I was about to get in the car, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't good enough. I'm sorry I called you a burden. I'm sorry I didn't see how special you are." I felt my chest tighten. "Thanks, Dad. You're going to do great things," he said. "I know that now. I should have known it all along." I hugged him, and for the first time in years, it felt real. It's been 6 months since I left Ohio. I'm writing this from my studio apartment in Portland, where I've been working as a freelance graphic designer and teaching art classes at a community center. Is it easy? No. Am I struggling sometimes? Absolutely. But I'm struggling on my own terms, building something that's mine. I've sold 3 paintings since I moved here. They're not masterpieces, but they're honest, and they're mine. I've made friends with other artists, other people who understand that success doesn't always look like corner offices and suburban houses. My relationship with my family is complicated. We talk on the phone every few weeks, and it's getting easier. Mom sends me care packages with my favorite cookies. Dad texts me pictures of sunsets, telling me they remind him of my paintings. Jake visits when he's in town for business, and we're slowly rebuilding our relationship as adults rather than as the golden child and the disappointment. They had to sell the house anyway. Turns out, they couldn't afford to buy out my share and couldn't make the payments on their own. They moved into a smaller place closer to town, and you know what? They seem happier. Less stressed. More like themselves. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd kept trying to be the daughter they wanted, kept waiting for them to see me as I am. But I don't regret leaving. I needed to find out who I was without their expectations weighing me down. The funny thing is, I'm not angry anymore. I understand now that they were doing what they thought was best, even if it wasn't what I needed. They were scared for me, worried about my future, trying to protect me from a world that doesn't always value artists and dreamers. But I needed to learn that I could protect myself. I needed to learn that I was worth more than their fears. So here's my question for you. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed and tried to work things out, or would you have taken the leap like I did? Sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who hurt us the most, not because they mean to, but because they're afraid for us. They want us to be safe, to be secure, to fit into a world that makes sense to them. But sometimes, being safe means being small. Sometimes, being secure means being stuck. I chose to be brave instead of safe. I chose to be myself instead of secure. Was it the right choice? Ask me in 5 years. But right now, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm living my own story instead of playing a role in someone else's. And that, more than any house or family approval or traditional success, feels like home. What do you think? Have you ever had to choose between being accepted and being yourself? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone else who's feeling stuck, who's feeling like a burden, who's wondering if they're brave enough to bet on themselves. You are. Trust me. You are.